Hey everyone, this is That Guy in Hutch, and you're listening to That Podcast in Hutch. Today, I have a good friend of mine, someone I've known for quite a while and have grown very close to over the years, Steve Becker. He's a number of things, or he's done a number of things in his life. He's a retired judge, a former state representative. He's a cowboy. He's an emerging podcast host, but probably most of all, he's papa to his grandkids. Steve, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. Yeah, I'm honored to be a guest on That Guy from Hutch. And yeah, we've developed a pretty close friendship. The one thing I have to correct about the introduction is I'm not a cowboy. I'm a wannabe. I'm a kid that still plays cowboy, so I don't have a lot of cowboy cred.
But you do have a lot of cowboy stuff out of Becker's bunkhouse.
I do collect a lot of cowboy stuff. Yeah.
Well, part of why I wanted to have you on today and talk with you a little bit, I want to talk about some of your history and your experience, but through Salt City Sound and this podcast network, you're starting a podcast that will be released in the next couple of weeks titled Cleared. Can you talk to me a little bit about that podcast and what it's about?
I'd love to, Jason. Yeah, a little bit of history about what led me to this point. My daughter, Beth, has been pushing me to do a podcast. I mean, she wouldn't even identify a subject or anything, but she just listens to a lot of podcasts and wanted to do one with me. And she'd been after me a long time to do it. And I finally relented. I have to say that nothing intimidates me more than technology. I'm an old man, Jason. I'm very old school, and I don't listen to podcasts. I don't know where to look for podcasts. But thankfully, we found a producer that will settle down my anxiety and say, I'll take care of all that. So, so that brings us to this point. I picked the topic, and it is the topic that I'm perhaps the most passionate about based upon my professional experience. The topic is wrongful convictions in our criminal justice system. It's a big concern of mine. It happens much more frequent than people understand. So, yeah, I'm excited about this project and hoping we can produce a good product.
I'm sure it will be. Well, let's talk about, I know I first came to know you. You were a district court judge in Reno County. And over the years, we've had a number of conversations, and I watched you on the bench and covered you when you were on the bench when I was with the Hutch News. But I've come to know over the years that some of the decisions that you have to make as a judge really weigh on you. And you have to make a decision. Not making a decision as a judge is not really an option. And you have to do it with the best information you have available. Can you talk about that? Some of the things that, or just kind of the sense of how being in a position to make those very difficult decisions weighed on you when you were on the bench?
Sure. First of all, not every decision was difficult. It's interesting that you mentioned that I had to make a decision. Absolutely. There was not the option of just not doing it. You had to make a decision, and yes, some of them were quite difficult. You also mentioned something that became very important to me. When I was having difficulty with a decision, I just couldn't reach that point of where I was going to go with the case. Somebody provided me with a gem that I relied on heavily, and it simply stated, when faced with a decision, make the best decision you can at the time with the information you have, and then forget it. You will never reach a point of absolute certainty. So that, I relied on that heavily, and that helped me.
And that kind of looking at things and knowing that you're making decisions that aren't perfect maybe, but are the best that can be done with the information you have, kind of folds into what you talk about in the podcast, right? Essentially, we're looking at your podcast examines legal cases, criminal cases, where people have been convicted of a crime. They were prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison. And as new information emerged, the case was reopened and re-examined, and the new information ended up clearing the person, which is the basis for the title, Cleared.
Yeah, that's correct. And I certainly don't plan on, when I analyze the criminal case, I don't want to get into the weeds. I'm going to do a summary of it and certainly touch on the highlights. But yeah, I'm going to present the facts of the crime. I'm going to present the evidence that was presented at trial. My daughter, Beth, is going to cover the personal aspects of the defendant. So I think in working as partners like that, I think we can make a pretty interesting podcast.
I think so. So she said, let's do a podcast together. You get to do this father-daughter project. That's the number one driver.
Absolutely, it is.
And then you were left to choose the topic. You chose the topic partly because of your background and your extensive history and experience in the legal world, but also this is important to you, right? I know we've talked about this some. You have a real passion for making the law work as well as it can, and understanding that it's not perfect, but trying to work towards better all the time.
Yeah, that's right. My experience, my professional experience, showed me how imperfect our criminal justice system is. Not so much of making these huge, blatant mistakes, but as I mentioned in this little quote that I relied upon, the point of absolute certainty never arrives. And that applies to our criminal justice system. And even in a trial, we instruct the jury, you don't have to be absolutely certain. The burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's a big difference between those two levels of proof. So yeah, mistakes are made, and that's what haunts me. I have a little trouble letting it go.
Did you have cases when you were a judge that kind of stuck with you, that you might have made a decision based on the best information you had, but in your mind there was just maybe it swirled around a little bit?
Yes. There's one big case, and perhaps if our podcast is accepted and followed, there's one particular case, local case, Reno County case, that I'd certainly like to revisit. But I'll have to be careful if I do that. We'll see how that develops. But yes, there are some. One thing I might add here, oftentimes, frequently, Jason, I would walk out of the courtroom when the case was over and just silently in my mind pray, man, I hope I got that right. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, a lot of times in a lot of areas of life, seems like there's an effort to make it as simple, as easy, and as straightforward as possible. But things like taking away someone's liberty, imprisoning them, taking them away from their family, those are weighty decisions, right? Even if the defendant has clearly has maybe a history of doing something, breaking the law or whatever, there's still that weight that comes with this is a very final decision that we're making in this room today.
During my judicial career, I know I had colleagues across the state that were very calloused. And I thought, and I'd listen to him speak and things like that. And I realized that would make the job so much easier if you didn't care. Mm-hmm. If you don't care, Heck, it's not an easy job, man. It'd be easy money. But if you care, if you have empathy, if it's really important to get it right, it can be tough. It can be a tough job.
And you and I served in the legislature together for a year. You were there a little bit before I was, and then we had a year that overlapped.
And I'm so pleased that I got to serve with you. That was a joy for me.
I loved it. I'm glad that time worked out. But I think about that sometimes in politics, because the other side of the legal world is there's the judicial side, but there's also the legislative side where we're writing the laws that then go in place and that judges have to follow. And I often think this would be an easier job if I carried with me the absolute certainty that what I know and what I think and my perspective in life is 100% right, because I would never have to think about anything.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, if you're so locked in that the door is closed and you're not going to hear anything else, yeah, it's easy peasy. I mean, when it comes time to take a vote, there's no question. But I would like to think that most of us aren't that way, that we listen to both sides, we understand both sides, we recognize what supports both sides. And that's what makes the job, more difficult, more weighty. My time I spent on the district court bench just served me so well when I changed branches of government and went to the legislative branch, and I used that experience. That was probably what I enjoyed most in my short legislative career, was when we were dealing with criminal justice issues. I really felt passionate about that.
Now, I remember when we were both in the legislature together, you had brought up an amendment to end the death penalty, and you pushed really, really hard as hard as you could on that, but it didn't go anywhere. So it seems like that effort, and I know that you currently serve on the Kansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty. It kind of tells me that we know that this imperfection in the system, in the legal system and in the lawmaking system, really, when it comes to the death penalty, that's another area of passion that kind of fits into this for you, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. That's part of the wrongful conviction issue, and I'd like to say when we bring up the death penalty, I think my strongest argument is, how can we impose the absolute certainty of death when we don't require the absolute certainty of guilt? That's the source of these wrongful conviction cases, all these exonerations, particularly since the development of DNA analysis. We don't require, people aren't convicted on absolute certainty. The jury looks at the evidence, the jury thinks it's strong enough, and we're convicted, and they return a conviction. There's a line or a quote from John Grisham. I've read quite a few of his books, and he's a legal scholar. He's certainly a wonderful writer. And he has stated that it's easy to convict an innocent person. It's virtually impossible to prove they're not guilty, to prove an exoneration. So in that atmosphere, in that environment, how can we execute people? And these exonerations, I think the average length of time from conviction to exoneration is well over 20 years, I think. And I always hear the argument as when a death warrant is issued by a court, when a death penalty is imposed. Let's execute. I mean, Kansas hasn't executed anyone since 1965. So we're paying for the death penalty, but we're not using it, which is another argument to get rid of it because of the high cost. But if exonerations take 20 years, we can't. Goodness sakes, Jason, let's not kill somebody when we haven't had time to work on an exoneration.
And I think it's what you said there is really important to me to kind of highlight. When we have a death penalty case, the standard of conviction doesn't increase. It's the same as any other conviction. The standard, the reasonable doubt level that would exist to a robbery or an assault or anything like that, that doesn't move up because it's a murder case. That reasonable doubt stays in place, but the punishment for that is finite and right. Much more severe.
And hopefully that message will come across really clear when we examine in our podcast these cases of exoneration. When you look at the evidence in this first episode, you look at the evidence at trial, and goodness, Jason, I'm thinking, how can they convict on that evidence? But they do. I mean, it ended in a conviction. And then when you can poke holes in all that evidence and you find out, goodness, there wasn't hardly anything there at all. And the case that we're going to analyze in the first episode is not a death penalty case. So we're not dealing with the death penalty, but still, you're exactly right. I mean, whether it's a simple drug possession charge or whether it's capital murder, the burden of proof remains the same.
Yeah.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
I think it's another point that we probably ought to address is you worked in this system for a number of years. So I feel like your passion in this isn't rooted in kind of a critique or an overall condemnation of the system. It really is just a matter of, in any system, there are so many variables and so many human elements that come into play. Habits that have been held over from previous generations that haven't been adjusted with modern times. You mentioned DNA analysis. We used to convict people without that, and now we have this new tool that's available that both serves to get better convictions, but also prove when someone's being wrongly accused. Can we talk about that? Just like there's so many new technologies, human variables, things that kind of play in from the moment that a case is called in to the conviction, there are multiple points of potential error, human error, which exist in everything. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, the big picture, of course, Jason, is it's a human system, and mistakes are going to be made. The reasons wrongful convictions occurred is a long list, and they include probably the top one is misidentification by eyewitnesses, and particularly interracial identification by eyewitnesses. Eyewitness testimony is not credible, and people don't understand. They think, I know what I saw. I know what I saw, and I know who I saw. Well, that's not necessarily credible, and but we rely on it so heavily. That's just one example of many things where our human efforts are less than perfect. And of course, that's that's all we have to deal with. And that's what the system is based on. So yeah, I'm not in any way condemning our judicial system or our law enforcement system or anything like that. I am trying to get people to accept that it is not perfect. Mistakes are made much more than people realize. And in that kind of system, how can we kill people?
Well, I'm really glad that you're working on this project. Again, the podcast is called Cleared. You can subscribe online now through your favorite podcast player or at the website saltcitysound.net. And I really want to thank Steve for coming on today and talking with me about this. And I'm glad that you're doing this. I know we talked about this before, and I'm glad that Beth pushed you to do a project, and I'm glad that you're using your thoughtful mind to kind of highlight for people some of the cases that are out there that show that maybe we don't live in quite a perfect system.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jason. Yeah, my daughter usually pushes me into doing good things. So a shout out to my daughter, Beth. But yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe this reveals some of my passion on this subject, but I'm really honored to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. I wanted to share with you the intro for Steve's podcast called Cleared. It'll be airing on the Salt City Podcast Network in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye peeled for that. And you can go to your favorite podcast player or saltcitysound.net and subscribe today.
My name is Stephen Becker. I live on the family farm outside of the city of Buhler, Reno County, Kansas. I obtained my law degree from Washburn University of Topeka. I was fortunate to serve as a state district court judge in Reno County, Kansas for 26 years. Following my retirement from the bench, I served 6 years in the Kansas legislature. The law is embedded in our society, and sometimes it works, and sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't. Over my career, I've found that sometimes we get it wrong. It happens more frequently than you think. That's the stuff that haunts me. In our podcast, we will introduce you to people who have been wronged and hear their stories. Of course, I will not be doing this alone. My partner in this endeavor is Elizabeth White, a graduate from the University of Kansas with a degree in political science, who brings a decade of experience with the Department of Corrections. Oh, yeah, she's my daughter. I couldn't be prouder. I invite you to join us as we explore what went wrong in the criminal justice system.
Wrongful convictions occur surprisingly frequently. As John Grisham, renowned author and legal scholar, has stated, convicting an innocent person is easy. Exonerating the wrongfully convicted is virtually impossible. There have been 2,800 exonerations since 1989. 123 of those persons exonerated had received the death penalty. That means 4 times each year the United States would have executed an innocent person. There are 2.3 million people in this country's prisons and jails. If 1% of the incarcerated population is innocent, and experts believe 1% is a conservative estimate, it means that 23,000 prisoners are serving a sentence for a crime they did not commit. This is an issue that must be addressed.
That is what this father and daughter team intend to do.
Join Stephen and Beth in Cleared, What Went Wrong in the Criminal Justice System on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere where you find your podcasts.
Hey everyone, there is still a lot of fair activity going on, a number of events happening at the fair. That will continue for the next week and through the weekend to the 19th. Make sure you get out there and get your favorite food or see your favorite event because all the fun's happening out there, but it wraps up on the 19th. A couple of other things happening in town that I'd like to make sure you know about. On September 21st, the Dylan Lecture Series has Colonel Mark Tillman speaking at the Hutchinson Sports Arena. At 2 p.m. Saturday at the Hutchinson Arts Center, there's an artist talk where you can meet and visit with a featured artist at the Hutchinson Arts Center. Also coming up September 30th through October 3rd is the Family Community Theater production of Arsenic and Old Lace. Showtime starts at 7:30 p.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday with a 3 p.m. matinee on Sunday. Also, don't forget that farmers markets are still happening all throughout the county. The Reno County Farmers Market continues on Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and Saturdays from 7:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Also check for the farmers markets in South Hutch, Arlington, Haven, and Yoder. If you have an event that you'd like to feature on That Podcast in Hutch, be sure to send me a note and let me know at thatguyinhutch@gmail.com. I'd be happy to talk about your event and let people know what you have going on. I'd like to thank a few of the people who've helped make That Podcast in Hutch possible. My son Mitchell Probst wrote and recorded the music for the show. Jenny Brigette put together some great graphics and promotional art. And Chris Acker helps overcome my mistakes to produce a great sounding product every episode. That Podcast in Hutch is made possible through a collaboration between the Hutchinson Arts and Culture Collective and Salt City Sound. They're working to bring resources and infrastructure to support art, music, and storytelling in our community. If you have an idea for your own podcast, reach out to them at podcasts@saltcitysound.net. If you enjoy That Podcast in Hutch, be sure to subscribe and share it with all your friends. You can also help support this production by subscribing to thatguyinhutch.substack.com or by emailing me at thatguyinhutch@gmail.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.
A Salt City Sound production.